our candidates, Tom Breyer and Eugene D. Pasquale, and to our moderator, Joyce Davis, opinion editor at Penn Live. My name is Alyssa Packer, and I am a member of Capital Region Stands Up, a grassroots, people's-powered group seeking to bring everyday working people into the political process in order to build a community and a country that works for all of us. We're here today to learn more about the candidates vying to represent us here in the 10th Congressional District, to hear their plans and positions on the issues that matter most to our members. We want to mention that all candidates were invited to attend, including our representative, Scott Perry, and we have today with us Eugene D. Pasquale and Tom Breyer, the two Democratic candidates. We will be here next Sunday, same time, same place, to hear from candidates running for seats in the Pennsylvania General Assembly. So we invite you to join us again next weekend. Our group organized both of the candidates' forums because we understand that it's our responsibility to hold our leaders and ourselves accountable as we work to build a more just society. We hope you will consider becoming a member of Capital Region Stands Up, and you can do so at our website, crstandsup.org, or over at the table by the door. Next week, we'll join together with 8 other chapters in Philadelphia at the Progressive Summit, and you can find information about that online as well. Tickets are $35. I also want to mention that there are some options for actions, to participate in some action with our group at the table, and I think flyers are on many of the seats out there. So with all that said, I want to just, again, thank our candidates, Tom and Eugene, for joining us today, and thank our moderator, Joyce Davis, for joining us. And a special thank you to all of you who are giving up time on this beautiful Sunday afternoon to learn more about the candidates running to represent us. Thank you.
Well, since we're giving out thanks, let me thank you for honoring me with this lofty position here of being the moderator for this important event. And again, thanks to each one of you because you're taking time out from a beautiful day. But this is important. This is your civic responsibility to learn and to interact with the candidates. So with that, I am going to give you and to give the candidates the rules of the road, okay? First, they will introduce themselves. You each will have 3 minutes to introduce yourselves. And did we decide who's going to go first? We got to flip a coin to decide who's going to go first. And whoever goes first to open will go last to close, all right? The questions and answers, you have, I think, seen them, but you're going to have 2-minute responses. Actually, I think we're going to do 2-minute responses, alternating who will go. And if another candidate is mentioned in the response, you will have an opportunity, that candidate, to respond for 30 seconds. Now, we do have a timekeeper here who's going to keep us all honest. The next thing we need to say is questions from the audience will be accepted after I go through the initial questions for them. You will be given cards, and you can write your questions on these index cards. Please make it legible so I can read it. It will come to me, and we will ask you with those to have 1.5-minute answers to try to keep things running smoothly. So, with that, do we know who's going to be? You're going to be the first. Okay, Tom Breyer will start us off. So here we go. Our first question. First, we want you to introduce yourselves, and then we will start into the questions. Tom.
Okay, thank you, Joyce. Before we start, I also want to congratulate Alyssa, a new Canfield Borough Council member as of November. Awesome. Alyssa and I knocked out 2 doors together, and I wasn't surprised to learn that she had won, so it's great to be here with Alyssa today. My name is Tom Breyer, and I'll start just by explaining exactly why I'm running for this seat. And it's really for 2 primary reasons. The first is that I was wrong about Donald Trump winning in 2016. Confidently wrong. And to be so wrong about something so important was overwhelming for me. To be wrong about what my future looked like. To be wrong about what our country stood for. To have such a blind spot I found to be really, really unsettling. And so after the 2016 election, I went back, and this ended up being the basis for the book I wrote, but I went back and I tried to understand how we can fix this. And I went back to the American Revolution. And what struck me initially was how young the founders were. Madison was 25 at the time the Declaration was signed. Jefferson was 32 when he wrote that all men are created equal. Hamilton was 30 when he wrote the Federalist Papers. These were young people who believed in nothing more than an idea. And they revolted for it. And the more I read about what they hoped our country would be, the more I read about what they hoped democracy would be, the more apparent it became to me just how far off track we've gotten. And the consequences, especially here in Pennsylvania, have been devastating. We have the most drug-induced deaths in Pennsylvania at 5,500 in the country, most of them caused by opioids. I've had 3 friends pass away from opioids. It's a devastating reality growing up in Pennsylvania today. We have the 3rd highest student loan debt. We have the highest African American unemployment. We have the 3rd worst carbon footprint. We had 3,000 people die last year prematurely from air pollution, the most in the entire country. And at a deeper level, and I think this is something we all feel but maybe not see every day, is the social and moral fabric of our country is unraveling as well. Suicide rates are at the highest they've been since World War II. Life expectancy is in decline for the 3rd straight year. Teenage anxiety is up 170%. This is it. We have a chance in this election to do things the right way and prove to the rest of the country that Central Pennsylvania is not going to play a role in what's happening. And so I'm proud to be the only candidate who's endorsed the Green New Deal. I'm proud to be the only candidate who is not taking corporate money. I'm proud to be the only candidate who's put forth detailed policy proposals on retirement security, on lowering the cost of pharmaceutical drugs, on climate change, on student loans, because I think we can really set a model for what politics looks like here in Central Pennsylvania. So thank you for coming. I'm excited to take your questions, and I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you to Capital Region Stands Up. And for those that did not see, Alyssa, thank you for the wonderful coin toss, the coin move across all 4. If you didn't see it, I don't know if we caught it up. We may need to go to the instant replay there. Fantastic job there. My name is Eugene D. Pasquale, and I'm your Auditor General. And I have been honored for the last 7 years to be your fiscal watchdog, to find over $1 billion wasted by Harrisburg, to hold the powerful people accountable, both to be a tough and fair fiscal watchdog when Republican Governor Tom Corbett was in, and to be a tough and fair watchdog when Tom Wolf was the governor. We also held agencies accountable. We found ways that we can make government work better for people. We found over 3,200 untested rape kits across Pennsylvania. By uncovering those untested rape kits, getting them into the FBI database, we're now bringing some of those creeps to justice, and it was me who was tasked with educating the other auditors across the country on how to do the same thing so we can do that same thing in every state across the country. We found 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the Child Abuse Hotline. Any single one of those calls could have been life or death for a child. But it wasn't enough for me. We held hearings all over the state. We met with child protection workers to make sure that the child protection services had the resources they need to protect children. And we had aggressive audits all over Pennsylvania school districts to make sure that every available dollar was getting to the classroom so that every child in Pennsylvania could have an equal opportunity to achieve their dreams. Quote from Thomas Paine, I believe it's Thomas Paine, which is, "The times have chosen us." And when it came the decision on what to do next in life, the times have chosen us. And with my background in life, my background in elected office, and my experience in my community, the time was now to try to change Washington, D.C. to make sure it worked for us. Because right now, it is not working for us. We have a current representative, Scott Perry, who is more interested in representing an ideology than in representing us. He wouldn't, even though Tom and I are here having this discussion, he wouldn't even come here to take part in this discussion. And again, this is a discussion. We need to make sure Washington is working for us. My background of holding the powerful accountable, fighting for programs that make the improvement in the lives of the people of Pennsylvania, getting rid of waste, and taking on the tough fight, regardless of who that fight is against, to move our region, our state, and our country forward. So I'm running for Congress to bring that experience so that I can represent you, unlike Scott Perry, who only represents an ideology.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well said, both of you. We will start now with our first questions. First question relates to criminal justice. Since Congress created mandatory minimum sentences for drug crimes in the 1980s, the federal prison population has grown from 24,000 prisoners to more than 214,000 prisoners. Should the U.S. abolish minimum mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug offenses? What criminal justice reform measures would you work to achieve? So, we will start with Eugene.
Yeah, we should probably answer.
Yeah.
It is a critical question, and my background on this issue is a little bit different than most candidates across the country. I am the only child of a convicted felon in statewide office in the United States. My dad was wounded in Vietnam. He was addicted to painkillers through bad medical advice from the VA, which led to a pattern of addiction and eventually a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal prison of 10.5 years. He ended up serving 8.5 years. We need to treat drug addiction like the disease it is. So we must reform the mandatory minimum sentencing law to give judges the flexibility to take into account the reality of what that individual was going through. I have, again, unlike most people, I've actually visited federal prisons because of my dad being there. You would be shocked of what those weekend visits are like. The young families, the young kids coming up in strollers that are coming to visit their loved one that are in those prisons. 35% of boys whose dad end up in prison themselves. We have to reform this system. But we also have to do a better job of improving education across the country to give every child an equal chance. That is something that is also a way to address this. Plus, as the Auditor General, we've audited all the drug rehab programs of Pennsylvania. Any program that is funding a rehab that is under 90 days isn't effective. We need to require insurance companies to fund rehab at 90 days. And we also need to make sure that we are treating drug addiction like the disease it is. The more people we get off of drugs, the more we reform this system, the more we improve education, the better our society will be.
Thank you. Tom.
So, to your question about mandatory minimums, I would advocate for the repeal of mandatory minimums. And I saw this as a law clerk on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit. There is no deterrent effect for mandatory minimums with drug crimes. And in fact, there's been a 1,000% increase in the number of drug arrests in this country since mandatory minimums were imposed in the 1980s. They simply don't work. And anybody who's seen the TV show The Wire knows that there's always a market for drug sales. And the fact that mandatory minimums now, we have 30 years of empirical evidence to show what does and doesn't work. The facts tell us mandatory minimums do not work for drug-related crimes, and so I would absolutely advocate for the removal of that. And I remember reading as a law clerk the racial impact of mandatory minimums. 54% of white drug offenders received a mandatory minimum when the sentencing guidelines allowed for it. 67% of black defendants received that mandatory minimum. There is a disproportionate impact that mandatory minimums have on minority criminal defendants, and that's another reason to repeal it. Beyond the mandatory minimums, I would also advocate for getting rid of private prisons. Here in America today, 4,000 corporations earn a profit from a role that they play in private prisons. That needs to stop. We have a prison industrial complex in this country. And the fact that we make money off people who are being incarcerated, I think, reflects a lot about what's wrong with our society. I would also end the cash bail system, and I would legalize marijuana. Because a young black man is 60 times more likely to get arrested for a drug crime than a young white man. there's a really intense and severe disproportionate impact that our drug laws have on young people, and especially young people of color. And there's a reason why black youth make up a disproportionate number of our prisons across the country. And so yes, it's mandatory minimums, but I think more holistically, we have to look at what's really putting people in jail in the first place.
Thank you. We move on now to gun violence. Please discuss the measures you would support to address gun violence. What is your position on the following policies? Universal background checks, a national permit to purchase policy, banning firearms for individuals with domestic violence restraining orders, or banning ghost guns and 3D printing of weapons.
So I support all of those. And I think we all recognize that mandatory background checks is the place to start. But a national permit to purchase a gun has also shown to be really successful. Johns Hopkins University just did a study on this where they found a 14% reduction in homicide for cities and towns and urban areas in particular that had a permit requirement that required people to get a license before they could go buy a firearm. The same is true for banning firearms for individuals with a domestic violence order. That's had a massive reduction in the amount of deaths caused by firearms. The ghost guns, actually Attorney General Josh Shapiro did a lengthy report on this where he found that identifying the ways that people can manufacture guns in the United States, which as of today still isn't considered a felony as long as there's not a serial number on that gun, which is egregious. And now with the technology of 3D printing, it becomes much easier as well. So I would support a ban on that. But I think at the end of the day, what we have to do is ban assault weapons. Since 2004, when the assault weapons ban expired, which incidentally passed with the support of 49 Republicans, which was a bipartisan piece of legislation, there's been a 183% increase in total in mass shootings and a 230% increase in total fatalities. It's just empirically true that if we have weapons of war on the streets, more people will die. And all you need to do is go into one classroom, one time, and see a student break down crying over fear of being shot, over fear of walking into school and having the thought that this might be the day that I die, and the psychological trauma of that. All you need to do is see one person explain the impact of that to know that we have to do something with these gun laws. And I think at the end of the day, an assault weapons ban is really the biggest step that we can take.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is one area where my experience as Auditor General in holding the powerful accountable and taking on tough fights probably most prepares me for Washington, D.C. The gun lobby is powerful, and they need someone like me to take them on. For starters, as Auditor General, I did a report on gun violence and the cost to taxpayers in Pennsylvania. 2/3 of all firearm deaths in Pennsylvania, and I believe this is pretty consistent across the country, are the result of suicide. So clearly, we have to do more to get people the help they need to prevent them from making that tragic decision. The Brady Group has endorsed me for my positions on reducing gun violence. Clearly, universal background checks must happen. This is something that close to 90% of the American public supports, yet we can't get Washington, D.C. to enact it because of the power of the gun lobby. That's why we need to take them on and enforce, in a sense, what 90% of the American people already want. About 22% of all gun sales in the United States happen without a background check. The York Fairgrounds, which is right across the street from a playground where my kids used to play when they were obviously younger. Almost every other weekend, there is a firearm sale there where all of these gun sales are happening without background checks. Universal background checks, and we must prevent civilians from having access to weapons of war. That, again, will put a significant dent in gun violence. And third, we clearly need to crack down on the 3D guns. The Attorney General, I think, is spot on that. It is going to be very difficult to enforce. We're going to need cooperation from federal law enforcement and the state attorneys generals, and obviously anything Congress can do to enforce those laws as well is something that must happen.
Okay, thank you. We've dealt with criminal justice, gun violence, and now we move on to education. Secretary of Education DeVos proposes a 100% tax credit for donations from businesses and individuals to scholarship sponsoring groups in order to fund tuition for private school pupils. Should the federal government provide tax credits or other forms of subsidy to non-public schools? You want to start? Okay, you start.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Sometimes when it comes to Betsy DeVos, we can be speechless. The idea that she is the Secretary of Education prior to her being appointed, I don't believe she had ever set foot in a public school. And she is on an agenda to destroy public education. I want to be clear about this. Regardless of individual decisions, her method is to try to destroy public education. So I have been endorsed by the National Education Association for my track record as Auditor General of holding traditional public schools, charter schools, and cyber charter schools accountable to make sure that kids are getting a quality education and the taxpayers haven't been getting ripped off like in so many, especially the cyber charters, over way too many years. Now, when it comes to specifically on tax credits, that proposal, I believe at the federal level, would be taking us in the wrong direction. We clearly need to put more federal dollars into public schools. If there's that money available that she's proposing to help businesses get a tax credit, then that money is actually available to help more public schools. And here's the specific area where federal dollars need to go into. The federal government has always fallen short on its commitment to special education. That is a federal requirement. The federal government was supposed to spend 40%, and now, after the Obama administration, under the Trump administration, it falls every single year, meaning kids that have special needs aren't getting equal access. As your member of Congress, I will fight every single day to make sure that special education funding at the federal level is funded higher than it is now, with the goal of getting it to 40%, to make sure that every kid, regardless of income and regardless of their need, gets the access to education they need so they can achieve their dreams. The Betsy DeVos plan would take money out of the classroom. I would fight to put it back in.
Thank you, Tom.
I agree. I think everything that needs to change about our system begins with Betsy DeVos. I mean, really. My mom is a reading specialist at a local public school. I see that she spends the stipend that she gets to buy school supplies for her students within the first couple of weeks. And most of these students come from low-income homes. They're struggling to get by. And the fact that we're taking money out of the public school system and funneling it toward a system that is already designed for the wealthier in our society, you know, anytime we see the word subsidy, we should be reminded of what Martin Luther King said. Poor people get welfare, rich people get subsidies. Taking money out of the common school and out of the public school system takes away the money for the students who need it the most. And so we should be driving money into the public schools and using the available resources from the federal government to even the playing field. And so if we look at what's happening in Pennsylvania, and as I mentioned earlier, we have the third highest student loan debt in the entire country. And so instead of providing federal money toward tax credits for private schools, what if we provided free 2-year associate programs? What if we provided free apprenticeship programs and trade schools and diversified our educational portfolio? And so it's not just investing in the K-12 public education, but it's broadening the definition of what we can have for education in the first place and making sure it's available to as many people as possible. And so I'm with Eugene. It's Betsy DeVos is the one person I think we can all identify as someone who needs to go, and it's putting a new, renewed emphasis on the student and what we can do to help students in this country.
Lots of agreement there, huh?